The concept of index gears on a bicycle is that you push a lever or press a button, and basically that moves the derailleur a specified amount to go into the next gear. And what we're going to talk about today is mechanical versions of that, and that's all based on cable tension being correct. Doesn't matter whether it's Campagnolo, SRAM, Shimano, or any other manufacturer, indexing is the way the gears work, and they all work by the same principle regardless of the manufacturer. You've just got to become the bike. G'day viewers, if you haven't been to this channel before, my name's Ashley Malcolm, and I'm here to show you how to index gears. Once I'm finished with this video, you should be able to do this on your own. Before you get your tools out, you should watch this video all the way through, because there's lots of tips and explanations all dotted out through the video. You can't just take part of it and think that you're going to be able to index your gears properly. It might even be worth taking some notes. So I've unset the gears on this bike, and now what we're going to do is we're going to set up the derailleurs with the limit screws, and then we're going to sort out the cable tension. And if you just pedal it, it only drops down to the first cog. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to unscrew that a bit. So that's the high screw, the 8th screw, and now it drops into the bottom cog, but it's still making some noise, and you can see that it's not actually in line with the bottom cog, the jockey wheels. And that's still making a little bit of noise, so let's just turn about another quarter of a turn, and we'll work further on that later when we've got all the cables connected and we're actually setting up the front as well. I always set up both the derailleurs and the gears at once, so because they relate to each other. Before we do anything else, we're going to connect the cable back up. Before I do that, I'm just going to screw my adjuster on the rear derailleur all the way in. So once the cable adjuster is screwed all the way in, what I do is I turn it out 1.5, 2 turns. I pull the cable underneath the pinch bolt and the washer, and I just do that up so it clamps the cable. Don't do it really tight, but tight enough so it'll hold. And I'll just give the cable a bit of a flick, and that's about somewhere near where I want it, like a loose guitar string. Right, so let's start shifting the gears up from the smallest one to the biggest one. And go one, you see, oh, and it's actually jumping from one to the other. You can see it's not going into the second cog properly. So let's just release that derailleur all the way down. And we're just going to unscrew the adjuster, so we're basically turning it out anti-clockwise. And what that's effectively doing is making this rear gear cable, or the outer cable as a whole, from the front to the rear, slightly longer, which in effect makes the inner cable shorter, relative to it. So let's give that a pedal now again. Shift up. Now it did shift up, but you can hear it's making a little bit of noise. I always release it a little bit, just makes it easier to do if you release the actual cable by 1 or 2 shifts. And then I'm just going to turn that out. I'm going to go like half a turn. So it's all gone down to the bottom. Shift up again. That sounds better. Second cog, third cog, shift all the way up to the top. Now it won't go into the top cog because I set it kind of like it would be factory out of the box. So let's just get our screwdriver and adjust the L limit screw, the lower gear limit screw. I'm going to undo the screw. Let's go a turn to start with, and I'll just pedal it and push it with my hand. And so look, it goes up there, but you can see it's trying to jump back down. So let's just let it off a bit, and then we'll just don't go too far with this, because if you go too far you could end up with a chain down the back. So I'm just going to take it off like 3/8 of a turn, I guess that was. Then that sounds smooth there. So let's see if it shifts up there. Yep, shifts up there. But you can hear there's still some noise. Some of the noise is coming from the front derailleur because it's rubbing on the chain, but there's still some noise in the rear derailleur. So let's just take that out maybe like another quarter of a turn. Don't go too far, like I said before. Right, shift back down 1 gear, shift back up. Right, so that works up and down on the 2 top cogs. So let's just shift all the way down the cassette or the freewheel, so all the way down to the bottom. Let's just go through them one more time. Making a bit of noise where it's rubbing on the front derailleur, but we'll fix that in a minute. Yep, so that's all shifted nice and fine. So let's set up the front derailleur before we go any further. So it shifts to both the small cog and the big cog at the front, so that we can set the rear gears up properly. Okay, so we've pedaled it and the biggest cog at the rear, and we can just hear it rubbing on the front derailleur. So what we need to do is we need to get our screwdriver again, and we need to go to the L screw. They're different on different derailleurs, but on this particular derailleur, it's the inside screw. So I'm just gonna pedal that and turn it until it doesn't sound like it's rubbing. And then I'm just gonna have a look down the back. I can see it just clears the chain. Okay, so now it's not rubbing on the inner plate of the front derailleur. I'm gonna screw this adjuster here. Now you may have one like in line somewhere. The more modern derailleurs, some of them have them on the actual derailleur itself as well. So now I'm just screwing that out, and I'm doing it more than the rear one. It's like I'm doing it maybe like 3 turns. I've probably screwed that out. We're probably going to need that to fetlet later on. Get our cable, right, down in behind the washer, tighten that up. Again, not too tight, but tight enough so when I pull it, it moves the derailleur. Okay, so I've got my front derailleur cable connected back up, and I'm just going to shift the rear gears all the way down. So you're in the smallest cog at the front and the rear. And then I'm just going to slowly shift the front one up into the big chain wheel. Now the reason I do it slowly is because if the limit screws are undone too much, you'll just throw the chain over the top, and you'll end up damaging your chain set with the chain. We're in the biggest cog now at the front. Now it's just sitting there. We just want to see if it travels any further. So yeah, it does travel further, but it looks like it would actually push it off. So we just get the screwdriver in the H screw there, and we just turn that in about 3/4 of a turn or something. Check that, still moves. So we're just looking for like about 1 mil of clearance between the chain and the front derailleur. So I've just done that about another 1/8 of a turn. It's still not enough, just to do it a little bit at a time. So the problem we've got here though is that it's still rubbing because the cable tension isn't right. So our derailleurs are now all positioned in the right place. They don't travel too far. So they're not traveling too far in, which on the rear would make it go into the wheel, and on the front it might drop onto the frame. And they don't come too far on the outside, where again on the rear it would damage the frame, it would come off and maybe even jam. And on the front it would come across the top, and again it would damage the chain set, and it may well jam as well. So and we just don't want that. Right, so I've put in the 2 smallest cogs, and what we're going to do is we're just going to see if the front derailleur lifts it up enough, which it doesn't. So now we've set the limit screws. What we want to do is we want to adjust the cable tension on the front derailleur so that it's pretty much where it needs to be. So what we're going to do is just don't pedal it, and just leave it in the big chain wheel and just release the trigger all the way. It'll just give us some slack here, and we can just screw this adjuster out. So we're doing the same as we did on the rear. We're screwing the adjuster out anti-clockwise, and that's basically tightening the cable up. And it's tightening it up because it's making this outer cable longer relative to the inner cable. So let's just without pedaling it again, shift it up, and that's gone all the way to the limit screw. You can hear a little rattle there in the rear derailleur. When you set the gears up in the rear, so it drops into the smallest cog on the front and the little cog, it's not always quite enough for it to be smooth in the big cog. It'll always need to be a little bit further out in the big chain wheel so that it runs smoothly. So let's just adjust that. I'm not going to do it much. I'm going to do it about 1/4 of a turn, nearly half a turn. Right, still making a little bit of a noise. So let's take it out a little bit more. And you should be looking behind here and just checking whether it's in line or not. So the next thing we need to do is just check our pinch bolts are tight. Front one, and check the rear one. You want to be careful not to over adjust the cables, because if you do that, the gears will just try and shift like more than 1 cog at a time. So let's just like put that in just so you can see what I'm talking about. Right, so let's just check that. You can hear it's a little bit noisy, so it's not quite in gear. So this is why you should only go like a little bit at a time, half a turn. It's easy to check whether the cable's too tight or too loose. You can either, on a bike with outboard cables here rather than internal cables, pedal it and pull the cable, and because the noise isn't getting any better, it's actually getting worse straight away. That means the cable's too tight. And the other way to do it, which you can do on a bike with the cables on the outside or an internal one, is to pedal it and just lightly push the derailleur towards the larger cogs. And you can hear straight away it's starting to make a noise. Yes, that means the cable's too tight. Now what I would do here is I'd just keep pedaling it and just screw the adjuster clockwise back into the derailleur to loosen the cable off a little bit, so you're effectively making the outer cable shorter, which effectively makes the inner cable, in comparison to it, longer. And that's basically making the cables getting looser. I always run through all the gears just to check that they're working, because this works here in the little chain wheel, but it might not work in the big chain wheel. There might be like another minor adjustment that needs to happen. Fine there, put it up in the big chain ring, check in the big chain ring, so 1 shift, 2 shift. It's making a bit of noise, so we'll just check that again. See, it's too tight, because as soon as I pull the cable, if I was pushing the rear derailleur, it's started to make a noise. So we just need to screw it in a little bit more, and that's it, that's the sound gone there. So if you've got an inline adjuster in your gear cables, like on the down tube or in the gear cable up the front of the bike near the handlebars, you can just make minor adjustments as you're riding along. The big work should really be done in the stand. When you're out there on the road and you think the gears are just starting to get out of sync a bit because the cable's stretching up, you can just adjust it while you're riding. And if you're finding this of value, please hit the like button down the bottom and share it with anyone you might think will benefit from it. Just a couple of tips on the screws on the derailleurs. Always check which one it is. Often they'll have an L or an H on them, which signifies L for low and H for high. But on the rear derailleur, there's also the B screw. This is only for one job, and if you use it, it does actually make the gears perform not as well as they otherwise should do. And the reason for that is because the derailleur, when the B screw is screwed out all the way, the derailleur is in the optimum place underneath the cassette or the freewheel for it to index the gears properly and be as smooth as possible. The B screw is there so that you can put bigger cogs on up to the maximum capacity of the rear derailleur, and you need to screw that in to stop the jockey wheels actually touching the teeth of the biggest cog when it's in the biggest gear, or the lowest gear, so the biggest cog. But by doing that, you are, like I said, making the derailleur not really work as well as it otherwise would do, especially coming down the cassette to the smaller cog. So you only really adjust that if the cogs are touching on the jockey wheels. Otherwise, you should just leave it alone. But another thing that can stop your gears indexing properly, which isn't actually the cable tension, is just a worn drivetrain. And no matter how much you adjust the gears with the cable tension, it just may not have, come back until you actually replace the parts. Now, the most likely time you're going to need to re-index your gears is after you've bought the bike and it's new and you've just ridden it for a while, or after it's had a service and it's had a new gear cable in it and then you've ridden it for a while, because the cables will stretch up and they will bed in, even though they're pre-stretched. That will happen. So if the gears re-index after the bike's been serviced, whether you've done it yourself or had someone else do it, or it's a brand new bike, and then they go out of sync, the way to adjust it is always to tighten the cable. And you just want to unscrew that adjuster on the rear, or whether there's one in line here, anti-clockwise, so it makes the outer cable longer, therefore, comparatively speaking, the inner cable shorter or tighter. Now, if your gears have been working for a long time, let's say like 1,000 miles, then it's unlikely to be the tightening of the gear cable that needs doing if the indexing is out. It's more likely to be something like you've dropped your bike and or it's been hit by something on the rear derailleur and it's bent the gear hanger, or it's going to be like the cable fraying or something like that. So don't always assume it's just the adjuster, because often it's not, it's something else.